Okay. All right, so we're at a couple minutes past 12, and I'd like to now introduce Gary Goff. Gary is a friend and colleague here in the Department of Natural Resources, and Gary has expertise in wildlife and forestry, and has a presentation that's called "You Build It and They Will Come." So it's about wildlife habitat management and creation, and we're pleased to welcome Gary. So Gary, I'm going to mute my microphone, and the floor or the airwaves, for whatever you want to say, is now yours. So welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Pete, and thank you all for joining me today. It's a nicer winter's day than in the past. So I'm going to warm up, or hopefully we all will warm up with a little game here. It's like the title slide says here, let's play Name That Tune. So if you're over 50, you may actually remember this as a TV game show where a tune would play and somebody would run down an alleyway and ring a bell, something to that effect. But so we won't be running down an alleyway, but if you would make a guess, even a wild guess at the song or noise or vocalization that I play, that'll just show that someone's listening and attempting to get into it here a little bit. This is not a test. No one will be graded. So all guesses are equally valid, I guess. So I'll play a sound of spring, which is yet a ways away, unfortunately, and then you type in the guess. So let's see if the technology also works here. So I'll move to the next slide. There's my sound one, and here it comes, hopefully. I'll play it again. Okay, so type in the pad there what you think it might be. Bird chirp, that's a good one. You only get partial credit for that. But the bluebird, yes, the bluebird is it, and you'll see it here in just a second. There's the visual. You all recognize that as a bluebird, and the theme is "You build it, they will come." Well, someone built a bluebird house, and guess what? They came. So here it is. The bluebird is the New York State official bird of New York State. So here's the next one. Whoop. Number 2, I guess, isn't going to work. That's interesting. I test run all these. Hopefully, they will work. They all tested fine an hour ago. But the good news is I can imitate this bird, if you'll pardon my poor imitation. But it's pretty simple. It's beep, 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 kind of a nasal beep, and that's all there is to it. All right, good. Someone's guessed it correctly, regardless of my bad imitation. American woodcock is definitely it. So let's go back. I'm not going to be able to play it, so but we'll be able to see. Here it is. Okay, so that's the American woodcock. It's a popular game bird. That's what it looks like, and there it is. And it's kind of a displaced shorebird that's moved terrestrial. And the beeping noise I was portraying is the male, out on the breeding grounds in the spring, March and April, out typically in an old field, an old growth field. And what he's trying to do is attract females. And then, so he'll beep on the ground and then spring into the air and circle up and around 100 yards up or so, and then flutter to the ground, all the while chirping and fluttering and making strange little gurgling noises. And all this takes place right at dark on a nice day, if there is such thing, I guess, in March and April. Very entertaining, a lot of fun. and you can't really scare them away. They'll just go ahead and do it regardless of the fact that half the family's out there in the field with them. Hopefully number 3 will work. Uh-oh. Well, I guess I'm sunk now. That's interesting. I had sound 1 to work. Sound 1 initially was always the problem one. Well, let me see what we got here. Okay. And this one is I don't have a sound, so you're not going to be able to go get it. So I'll just have to go to back to the slides here. And I can try to hit sound 3 here now. No, still doesn't want to work. Mr. Murphy's got me today, I guess. And so there's the bird, and it's the let's see, we'll hit it again here. The screech owl, eastern screech owl. And they have a kind of a 2-tone song, kind of a trill followed by a warbler kind of a noise. I never heard a screech owl screech. Oh, here we go. Here comes one. That's it. Excellent. Good. Thank you. Who did that? Peter, I assume?
That was me. We're circumventing technology.
Wow. If you only knew what we had gone through to get to the point where I thought I was. But Peter still got his working. Okay, so Pete, you can kick in for the next one if that works. So Peter hit sound 4. I don't think I'm going to be able to. It looks like I'm cursed. Yep, I'm cursed. There you go. Okay, type that in. Frog is correct. Let's get the species. Not leopard. Good guess. All good guesses. Wood frog. Wood frog wins. And here it is. They kind of sound like ducks. So it's the earliest breeder in March. They're in and around small pools or burrow pools in wooded areas. In the summertime, they hang out under logs, leaf litter, etc. And what's interesting about these guys is they can withstand sub-freezing temperatures. So they don't need to dive to the bottom of a deep pond in the winter. They just kind of go into some mud and slurry, not much of a pond at all. And if the pond freezes to the bottom, they don't freeze out. So that's to their advantage, obviously. They kind of have that little black mask. And this frog is only 1.5 inches long, if that. So great. Thank you, Peter. All right, let's do sound number 5. I think we're all going to get this one correct. Excellent. That's obviously the eastern wild turkey, and that's the male gobbler strutting his stuff quite literally in the springtime. That also is a very popular game bird. Dinner. I like dinner, yes. So, eastern wild turkey. So this is, now I'm going to begin the real webinar. So obviously this presentation is brought to you by Cornell Cooperative Extension, and I work in the Department of Natural Resources, and Cornell is the land-grant university for New York State, and there's a core of faculty and staff that work here, and then they obviously work with and rely on the distribution of material and programs actually mostly to be delivered out of the county offices with the county cooperative extension agents or educators. And I see there's a few of those people that I recognize from New York State, and I'm sure there's a few more from other states today. So welcome here, and away we go. So the real title of the presentation is Your Forest is Wildlife Habitat, and the subtitle is You Make It and They Will Come. And what's that all about is I kind of borrowed that line from the movie Field of Dreams. That was a Kevin Costner program, and what that was all about is he was told, I guess, by nefarious voices that if you make it, they will come. And what he had to make was a ball field. When he built the ball field, everybody thought he was nuts. A whole bunch of essentially ghosts of ball players past came to his farm. So what is habitat? Habitat essentially means home. And so a home for wildlife, and everything you need for your home and existence, wildlife also needs for its existence. And so habitat doesn't mean a whole lot specifically to the landowner until you actually identify the species. So here I'm targeting a raccoon. And so what is habitat criterion or necessities for a raccoon? Well, the cover could be a den tree with a hole in it, and they might den up there over the winter. Raccoons obviously need water to drink, but water also to a raccoon is more than that. It's also essentially a food source. And a typical food source for a raccoon are any and all things aquatic, salamanders, crayfish, or frogs, or about anything else. They're an omnivore. They'll eat most anything. So what are the four elements of wildlife survival? Essential for it: food, water, cover, and then space. And I'll quickly run through some examples of those. So there's plant material, animal materials, mineral requirements, and that pretty much makes up the same foodstuffs that you need. Carnivores eat the animal material, herbivores eat plants. We all need minerals. This shows some sheep, or goats, I should say. These are goats on a outcropping of salt out west somewhere. So they're licking up the minerals. Mineral licks are a critical part of almost all wildlife species. So what's it all about is the pyramid of life. And you saw this back in 7th grade biology. But when it comes to actually creating wildlife habitat on your land, what's most important is to make sure you have a broad base of plant materials. When I say broad, meaning a wide variety of species. And the more species you have, the more stable the base. The more stable the base, the more likely you are to have success with the populations of wildlife that you're interested in. As an example, if in your woods you only have oak trees and a frost comes along, or a disease or a pest or something, and wipes out the acorn crop for that year, and indeed oaks don't have acorn crops every year, you would kind of like cross off the oak, and there goes a nut source. And if at the same time you had a early frost that killed some herbaceous plants such as maybe strawberries or rubus raspberries, and you cross that off, you can see that if that's your only two choices for food in those two categories were gone, the pyramid begins to shake apart. So instead of having only oaks, you'd be wise to have hickories also, and some other nut trees, and et cetera, right on down the line. There's an awful lot of shrubs that have berries and nuts and fruits on those too. And so a wide variety of shrubs are critical. At the top of the food pyramid, and my little pyramid, was the hawk, and that's obviously a predator. And kind of down toward the base, on the kind of the first order of consumers, was the cottontail rabbit. And so the predator-prey relationship and populations are critical to a healthy ecosystem. If you're going to have a lot of prey, you have to have some predators, otherwise the prey themselves will suffer. They quite literally will eat themselves out of house and home sometimes. Water is critical, not only for drinking, but for the unique habitat it provides. And there's different forms of water: moving water, stagnant, or water like in a pond or swamp. And then temporary water is hugely important in a woodland. And this would represent a vernal pool or a spring ephemeral pool. And it's typically fills up with snow melt and evaporates as of, say, June or July. But a wide variety of wildlife and insects depend on a temporary body of water. And we'll cover some of that in just a minute. Here's this slide doesn't look too great, but it's an old slide. And a fellow that used to work here in the Department of Natural Resources owned about 30 acres of woodlands, and he had a wet area in his woods. And he always wondered, well, if I could make that hold water year-round, surely that would enhance some of my wildlife habitat. And so he just rented a backhoe and had at it for about a day and dug it out and diked it up, put in some locust logs down here at the outlet, and dammed it up. And sure enough, he created permanent water through the year. And it was a much more reliable source of water and habitat for a variety of species. Cover is hugely important. There's den and nest, as I said, for our buddy the raccoon, woodpeckers. This is a red-headed woodpecker, could be a pileated woodpecker, could be a flicker. Belt for red is hugely important for getting out of sunlight during the hot summer, etc. And then just plain good old escape cover, such as our buddy the rabbit. We would find this a wonderful addition to his habitat. Space is very important. We can't create space, but we can create, enough healthy habitat in a configuration and in a size that is appropriate for species that we're interested in. And so this doesn't come as any great surprise, but if you just wanted chipmunks on your land, you probably can get away with it if you only own even just 1/10 of an acre. So you could have your own little population of chipmunks. On the other hand, you may not have your own population of spotted salamanders, and that's what this guy is here. They actually need something like 10 to 18 acres of woodlands to run around in during the summer. In the spring, they will be breeding in those vernal pools, but the vernal pool is only the breeding location. They need habitat to run around and acquire the rest of their food resources in the woods. We all know white-tailed deer are very common across the state. Generally, they need about a square mile, 640 acres. But the better the habitat, remember that that pyramid of life, the better the habitat, the more variety there is, the smaller the acreage needs to be. So in some very good white-tailed deer habitat, and often, say, even in suburbia, deer will exist very comfortably in as little as a quarter acre, or not a quarter acre, but a quarter square mile. So only, like 30 acres, 40 acres would be enough. Goshawk is a predator bird, and it needs a huge amount of land in order to, it also will defend some of this land. Some of this is territorial. It's more than just does the land provide the habitat. And then bobcats, as we're going further down the line here, need something like 13,000 acres for a male. And he also will defend that territory to some extent. So bottom line is probably don't try to be everything for all species. You'll go broke and you probably won't have any success anyway. So another test time. So what's the habitat rating of this habitat? And this is a trick question. I know you're all gnashing your teeth saying this isn't fair and I don't know what he's talking about. All right. But slim to none is obviously a good guess. Where's the food? Where's the cover? Where's the water? I don't see anything there. And the reason this is trick is we're all ground-based. I'm looking out through at the ground, and I live my life from on the ground to the top of my head. Maybe the top of my hands might get up to 8 feet. So everything I want is better be in the first 8 feet. But that's not the case for all wildlife. There's a whole canopy that goes from 8 feet to probably 50 feet in this woods. And there's not much going on in the lower 8 feet, but there may be a lot going on in the upper 25 or 30 feet. So say the habitat rating only works if you define the species and then you say, well, for that species, for this time of year, under these conditions, does this habitat, does this ground provide something that it needs, and what would that rating be? So for deer, you would say this habitat ranks as 0 to 2. I mean, there just isn't anything a deer would be interested in there. On the other hand, if you're a songbird or maybe a pine siskin or something, say this is a conifer plantation, this may be a 10. You know, if you go from 20 feet to 40 feet up here, it may be perfect habitat for that species. So it all depends. It's like the answer to all great questions are yes, no, maybe. Really, most of the time it all depends. So getting down to nuts and bolts, selecting a habitat improvement project. And so as you're looking at your land, or your client's land, and what species are they interested in, so you got to define your species and get to know your species as to what they need through 4 seasons of the year. You know, if they don't fly south, then you better be providing what these species also need through the winter. So what's needed versus what can you provide, and it's a balancing act. And then what you can provide needs to be assessed with consideration of compatibility with your other objectives. You know, you have other land uses. Your neighbors have land uses. You may want to protect some of their land uses by, say, not having too many deer, as an example. Is your site appropriate? And then, of course, the bottom line always is how much time, money, equipment, and expertise do you have to devote to your habitat improvement? So this is a huge question to start with. And there's no sense of going out there wailing away, trying to do something good until you gave a critical analysis of where you are and where you need to go. Good habitat for bark-boring beetles. Absolutely. Yeah, I tend to be mammal and avian focused. There's a whole world of entomology out there also. So labor, time, and money. You know, none of us have enough of any of those. And I just thought this tree, money grows on trees. I'd like to have a few more of those out in my habitat. So focus your management efforts on limiting factors. So get to know your wildlife or the guild or the group of wildlife you're interested in and come up with what you think is missing, you know. But what for the fact that I had better winter food, I would have more turkeys. Or if I had better nesting habitat for my bobolinks, I would have more bobolinks. And so it's that kind of consideration you've got to come to grips with. And this is an example. And so what you have in your woods, or what you can manipulate, is generally the group of plant species at different stages of succession. And succession is the tendency of vegetation types to change over time in a predicted manner. That is succession. So at time, if you take bare land, we'll say this is bare land, and then you give it 5 or 6 years, it'll grow to grasses. 5 or 6 years after the grasses, you might get some shrubs. So and then you go into like early pole stage. This stage may be 30 or 40 years old, and 50, 60, 70, 100 years old. Through natural succession, you'll go from, you know, to mature trees. Typically, that's how it works. And with those different habitat types, like here's the grasslands, you get a whole bunch of grassland birds, for example, and some mammals that live in grasslands. And a lot of species work the edges. Oh, by the way, they'll work grass and shrubs. And so you would see like the cottontail rabbit likes grasses and it likes shrubs. On the other hand, once a mature forest is created, the cottontail rabbit finds no habitat of any use there. The gray squirrel, on the other hand, has not much use for early successional habitat, the grass and the shrubs, but it does have some use for the more mature woods. So what you have and where you want to go with natural succession will largely dictate what kind of species will call that home sweet home and do well. Here's a picture that depicts natural succession. So I'm standing here on the road and I've taken a picture of where the town highway mows this grass every year. That's habitat manipulation. They're mowing the grass and it has an old field look to it. This is a pasture that was no longer mowed or managed in any way, and it had come back to shrubs. And so this has probably not been manipulated for 20 or 30 years. And then in the background is a pine forest, probably a fairly young pine forest, but this may only be 50 or 60 years old. So there's 3 stages of succession, and there's a whole wildlife cohort group that goes with each of those. And here's a panorama of a landscape. And once again, here's 3 different succession stages. This would be early succession, old field, middle succession, brush and shrubs, and then older succession, mature hardwoods. And with each of these, you get a wildlife cohort or component group that lives there. For example, this would be an old field grasslands that isn't mowed typically every year. You might want to mow it every 3rd year to keep it in grasses. That would be an example of habitat manipulation. But you think about all the grassland songbirds that would benefit from this. So if you had maybe 20 acres of old field that looked like this, then that could be prime habitat for species such as the bobolink. You know, many people love the bobolink, and that's great stuff. And then there's a whole host of species, both mammals, insects, salamanders, whatever, that associated with shrubs, and the same thing goes with mature forests. So what has New York State done over the years? Well, New York State looks very different now than what it did, say, back in the 1870s. Of course, it looked very different in 1672, but as of 1870, at least in the southern tier of New York, much of Pennsylvania, virtually all of the land that was remotely suitable for agriculture was in agriculture. So in about 1880, 1900, in New York State, we were down to about 25% forest land. And those forest lands were primarily in the Catskills and the Adirondacks. All of this southern tier was farmland. And here's my hometown currently, Newfield, looking at the covered bridge in downtown Newfield. In 1870, there's Protts Hill, and there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 trees on Protts Hill in 1870. So what kind of habitat was that good for? Well, woodchucks, meadow voles, and meadowlarks, say. I'm just kind of guessing at it, but that's the habitat that's suitable for. And there were no deer in Newfield in 1870, I'll guarantee you, because there was no rules and regulations or laws protecting deer. Plus, that's not deer habitat. There's nothing there for deer come wintertime. On the other hand, 1970, once all that farmland was abandoned, and that's a steep hillside, that's why that was abandoned. As of 1870, through natural succession, that hillside grew back. Now how many trees are out there? Well, there's more trees out there than you shake a stick at. Innumerable. You couldn't count them. What was also interesting, as of about 3 years ago, just off this picture, there was a timber harvest of pretty nice oak. So it had gone all the way from 1870 to 2010 from an abandoned pasture to a stand of sawtimber, of mature sawtimber-sized oak. So succession, time moves on, succession moves on also. What has happened across New York State? Exactly what you just saw in that picture has happened across much of New York State. 1970, we were at 30% sawtimber. 30% of our forest land was sawtimber, and 40 years later, 2010, we're up to 60%. So with that shift in going from not much sawtimber to a fair amount of sawtimber sized trees, there was correspondingly shift from 50% seedlings and saplings down to what we now have across New York State, about 10%. So you can see over that time, there's been winners and losers depending on the habitat needs of different species. And as a simple example, in 1970, we had a lot of seedling and sapling cover. We also had a lot of cottontail rabbits and rough grouse. And the cottontail rabbits and rough grouse, except for pockets, nowadays have tanked just like the saplings and seedlings habitats have. On the other hand, we didn't have a whole lot of turkeys in 1970, but with more advanced, older age forests, we now have more turkeys. So as the habitat has changed, so have our populations of wildlife. So let's get personal. Here's my house in Newfield, right there. I own 15 acres, and that's my 15 acres I have the ability to do something with. And so if I want to do something good for wildlife, I step back. I got this picture off Google, obviously, and you too can do this. Type in your address, and there will be your house, and zoom out, and you can see what the neighborhood looks like, see what the landscape looks like. And you got to realize you can't do everything for all the species you might be interested in on your 10 or 15 acres or even your 100 acres. But if you step back and see what the neighborhood's got going for it, I can determine with my interests, what could I do? What are the limiting factors out there that I can have some ability to manipulate to enhance the wildlife I'm interested in? And what I'm up to on my land primarily, well, when I first bought the place, there was no conifer cover anywhere. There's conifer cover down here, but none up around my house. So I planted a whole bunch of white spruce, and you can see them here. And that white spruce now has wildlife that wouldn't have been there otherwise. The other thing I do is every 3 years I mow this field, and I keep that mowed back so that it's good woodcock habitat. Remember I said the woodcock have to have a breeding area of open old field, early succession habitat. And I love to hear the woodcock out here in March and April. And they're out there. As long as I keep that mowed, I will always have woodcock, at least in my little field here. What I'm also interested in, though, is I've let a lot of this revert back to more brush. And the reason I like a lot of brush is I like cottontail rabbits. And the reason I like cottontail rabbits is because my dog likes cottontail rabbits. And so I get a lot of fun with her out back here, just listening to her chase rabbits. So that's what I do with my land. It takes a little bit of manipulation to do that. I got to kind of hold the line, set back succession here, hold the line on succession there, and advance succession here. And this gully is too hard to traverse, too hard to really do anything in. Now, that'll be my forever wild old growth stand. And there certainly are some birds in here that you don't have out here. For example, I have, I'm trying to think what I have out there. Well, I don't know. I know I have rufous-sided towhees, etc., in these here, in the brushlands. So, what about habitat? Micro projects? What can you do to get things cooking on your land? Kind of micro, meaning small scale, quick, inexpensive, easily done. That's my definition of micro. And that's a good place to start. Start with success. So, things you can do in providing food. The limiting factor is food. You plant seedlings, or you maintain seedlings. You do crop tree management and stream habitat improvement. So we'll quickly go over these. So here's a old field that has been mowed, harrowed, and planted. And the goal here was to have plant switchgrass. And here's a mature switchgrass stand. And what's neat about this is it has seeds for songbirds through the summer. And then switchgrass actually is very stiff, and it provides excellent standing cover for a lot of wildlife, including pheasants. Pheasants typically need some cover through the winter. That's their limiting factor, and a field of switchgrass can be very good for them. White cedar is a conifer that has cones and is very nutritious for a lot of wildlife like to browse on it, such as deer. Trouble is, if you just go plant white cedars out there, you're planting a smorgasbord for deer. You better fence it. You can see the fencing here. If you fence it and allow it to get taller, at least it'll continue to exist. Otherwise, it'll annihilate it. And here's an example of a outplanting of different shrubs we have at the Arnott Forest. And we got all those shrubs through the New York State DEC tree nursery. And you can do that too. And that's one of the resources we'll point out here in just a minute. So at the Arnott Forest, here, this is Dan Anderson, who is a master forest owner volunteer from Chautauqua County, and he's leading a presentation on valuable wildlife shrubs. And so I think this wildlife shrub is red panicled dogwood, and it's the one you see. A lot of people call it gray dogwood also. And it has white berries, and everything out there loves those white berries comes fall, especially rough grouse. If you have an old field that's got red panicled dogwood and has those white berries, you will have rough grouse in them. These are my little kids when they were tiny little kids. And we're in a plantation here. This is not my plantation, but it's a locust plantation that someone had planted, and they put tree tubes around the trees to keep the deer and other wildlife from them. And once they get tall enough, that'll be a pretty valuable wildlife stand in that locust has good seeds for wildlife. Very, very prolific seed crop. Plus, it's a good firewood tree. Plus, it's a great tree for posts. Crop tree management. This is a guide, and I've got that in the resource area. What this is all about is you pick a tree. This is the crop tree out in your woods, and you attempt to release it on 2 or 3 or 4 sides. You know, it's a circle, but you call it a side. So there's a side, side, side. And if you want good things to happen for your crop tree, you would cut these trees or kill them otherwise and release the crown and allow it to prosper. It'll grow faster. It'll produce more nuts and berries or fruits. So here's an example of a landowner has chosen this engulfed apple tree, and we all seem to have these out in our woods. And this woman here, who used to be a student of ours, is cutting back the grapevine and cutting back, releasing its crown to have some access to light. And she's also probably pruning away some of the excess growth of the tree itself. And here she is fertilizing it after it's been pruned and released. And here's the results. The fruits of the labor are nice apples. And, these apples are great for wildlife. I don't think there's any wildlife species out there that doesn't eat or benefit from apples, including us. Here's an example of something you do with streams on your property, although this is a warning note, I guess, is don't muck around with your streams until you get approval from New York State DEC. But typically, you can do good things with not necessarily permanent streams, but like intermittent streams that don't seem to flow all year. And a perfect example of that would be this little pool digger. If you have a stream that doesn't have water in it all year, if you make one of these pool digger things, you'll create a pool, or the water in the springtime will create a pool, and this pool of water will last through the summer. And with that pool of water, you'll maintain some fish or minnows or crawdads or frogs or salamanders because you did have water year-round. So that's a great little trick to make that happen. So what are some habitat micro projects? We did food projects. Now we're doing habitat, bird houses, brush piles, snags, and vernal pools. All kind of quick ones. I'll quickly go through those. Here's our buddy the bluebird. You build a bluebird house, they will come, typically. Although there's some tricks to that. Typically, you want 2 bluebird houses side by side because one will be taken over by tree swallows And then the other side over here, if you had another one, might actually have a bluebird in it. There's more to meet the eye on all these suggestions, but this is just meant to be a quick overview. Here's an interesting little project. This is a burrow for a cottontail rabbit, and that's just plain old rough cut lumber, couple clay pipes here. That's what it looks like before it gets buried. So you bury that in the ground underneath a brush pile. Here's that brush pile. The condo is underneath here, and that's the entry. There's two entrances, an entrance and an exit. Obviously, it has to be, otherwise it's a trap. But you build it, they will come. This was built, and they being cottontail rabbits, they came, and they're calling that home sweet home, all because of the effort that the landowner put into it. You can save snags or dead and dying trees. Those are home sweet home for wildlife, hugely important. Amphibians benefit, it's kind of like the insects, kind of overlooked wildlife guild that people hardly know of and hardly appreciate, but there's a whole slew of them out there, and these are some of the more common ones. These do not depend on vernal pools. They just live in the woods, in moist woods, so you have to have moist woods and down in woody debris. These species down here, on the other hand, do depend on vernal pools, or temporary pools in the springtime. And here's one, it's a vernal pool. And so you can either build these, or it's actually probably easier just to protect the ones you have. And here's another one. And this is protected to some extent. This is a logging job. The vernal pool was here. This is a big logging job. And wisely, the landowner left a couple, 3 trees to provide shade here, so the water stays cool and it doesn't evaporate so quickly. That's a good idea. Salamanders need the pool. They also need habitat that goes with it. So a spotted salamander might need like 500-foot radius. That would be like 18 acres by the time you describe a circle around there. A Jefferson salamander needs more, and a wood frog needs even more. Remember a wood frog croaking like ducks in the springtime? They need quite a lot of acreage to actually have enough space. Here's some macro projects. Macro being, going to take more time, more equipment, more money, and more know-how to make some of these things happen. This is just a quick listing of things that you might want to consider. Corridors are hugely important. Much of our habitat, or woodland habitat, if you're looking at woodland habitat across the southern tier, is fragmented. 1-acre woodlots, 10-acre woodlots, 50-acre woodlots. They're more valuable if wildlife can come and go. Populations can come and go and reseed, so to speak, populations of woodlots. So maintaining, field hedgerows, these are hedgerows rather than wiping them out. Hedgerows themselves are a habitat type, but also maintains corridors from this woodlot to another woodlot to another woodlot, say. And then corridors along streams are hugely important. There's hardly any habitat endeavor more important than maintaining cover along streams. It's good for the stream, and it's good for wildlife, and it's good for the water. Here's an example of you build it, they will come. This field in Jefferson County was all field tiled, and drained away to get rid of what was a natural wet area or natural swamp. And through the Fish and Wildlife Service, there's a program where you can break up, jam, and take out those drainages, and the natural wetland characteristics will come back. And here's an example of a little pocket wetland. It was never particularly good cropland even after it was tiled. It was always wet, always cool, always get your equipment stuff there. The landowner said, heck with it, I'm just giving up. Let's give it back to nature, and they did. And this is, you know, it doesn't look like much from the air, but when you go down there, and we spent some time down there, there's ducks and salamanders and frogs and great blue herons and deer tracks and mink tracks, and it's just an oasis of wildlife. And if there's one thing I can say about habitat efforts is, if you want a new wildlife species and a whole new ecosystem, just add water. You add water and they will come, and you can have a pocket salamander pool that you'll get a whole new ream of species in your woods, say. This is, you know, like a 3-acre wetland. And Sally's right. USDA and RCS and Fish and Wildlife Service also have very similar programs. Absolutely right. I'm not looking at the comments, but you guys all seem to have this pretty well figured out. That's all very good. So what are some habitat or improvement things that are compatible with some of your interests? Well, if you're interested in sawtimber management certainly is not necessarily bad for a lot of wildlife species. In fact, it is great for a lot of wildlife species. And so here's an example of a canopy, closed canopy, a lot of ratty looking white pine in there, but there's some nice hardwoods sprinkled in this stand. And so what we did is we brought in a feller buncher that went through there and nipped out all the small conifers primarily, and we sold those for chips. This is all done out for us. So this spot is exactly this spot, which is exactly this spot, you know, before thinning, after thinning, and just a couple years later, and you can see, you know, there's valuable sawtimber trees there now, and these are almost mature now. This is all like 30 years ago, and you can see the brush and the berries and other species coming in. They're all great wildlife habitat, both food and shelter. So this is a win-win-win for the landowner and a lot of wildlife. Here's an example of a sawtimber harvest down at the Lenox Forest down in Delaware County, and this is a shelterwood cut. And essentially, it's leave a few of your best trees. It's a silvicultural treatment. Leave a few of your best trees, good species, good form, good quality, and leave a lot of debris and slash on the ground to protect the seedlings that will come from this open canopy and the enhanced production of seed. So this is all great, portends great things for regeneration of valuable sawtimber trees and great things for a lot of wildlife. Here's an example of a clear cut. Some people say, well, clear cut's got to be disastrous for wildlife. Well, it's going to be at least temporarily disastrous on this, you know, 2 or 3 acres. So this is an aspen stand that was clear cut and all ground up for pulp to turn into paper. So this is year 1. A couple years later, you can see this tree, same exact spot. This is just natural regeneration, mostly root and stump sprouting. And then a matter of just a few years later, it's thicker than anything. And here you have, we'll see if we can get a sound to play here. Oh, no. Okay, Pete, if you're there, you can play sound 6. It didn't sound very good. Oh well. What it's supposed to be is a thump, 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 thump. And that's okay. So you can guess what that might be. Woodcock, good guess, but it's a rough grouse. It's a rough grouse drumming in the spring, and we'll go back to. It's a male rough grouse on a drumming log in exactly this kind of habitat. So he's protected from its cover. It's breeding cover and it's protection cover. And here he is on his drumming log, and here he is drumming, and that thump, thump, thump noise you hear are his wing beats, and what he's doing is trying to attract a female to breed with in the springtime. You'll also hear them in fall. So a little bit of advice, don't let this happen to you. So this is a landowner that was interested in both sawtimber and wildlife. And so they decided that they would do a patch clear cut, which was not a bad idea silviculturally, because they were hoping that more valuable species would seed in, wind-blown seed would come in here, such as aspen or maple or something like that. And this little patch would regenerate, and the wildlife would benefit from that regeneration. But instead what happened is there's too many deer on this site, and there's too much beech, initial beech, and the beech stump sprouted and root sprouted, and this person ended up with, instead of a diverse bunch of habitat good for wildlife, they ended up with a beech thicket. Now, beech thicket certainly has cover, but it doesn't have any nuts, fruits, or berries, and beech will eventually die of beech bark scale disease. So it's kind of a dead-end road, unfortunately, for this landowner in this stand. But all that aside, that's a whole nother lecture. You know, how do you manipulate stands to grow back regeneration? That's a whole nother topic that we aren't going to be covering today. So, we're about out of time. Here's my summary. Get to know the wildlife species of interest, because each species has habitat requirements. Get to know your land and adjacent holdings. That's the big picture. Get the big picture so you can figure out what you can contribute to the landscape, rather than trying to provide everything for every wildlife species, because that's just going to be very frustrating and ultimately unsuccessful. Identify the habitat limiting factors. You know, is it breeding cover? Is it nesting cover? Is it winter food? You know, what is the habitat limiting factor? But what if I had some more of that? I would have more of the species I'm interested in. Make sure your goals are compatible and complementary, both with things you're interested in and your neighbors. Start with simple, surefire projects. Can't beat a bluebird house, as an example, or a brush pile. Work with nature, understand what succession is, understand what regeneration is. Don't try to fight Mother Nature. That also usually is fraught with failure. And then a whole nother lecture is control the deer and control the invasives, otherwise your best laid plans will all go astray. Seeking counsel is hugely important. There's a core of master forest owner volunteers out there that we run out of our department. There's like 200 of them across New York State. They all have training. They all have expertise in wildlife management. You contact them on this website, and they'll come out typically and give you a half-day walk in your woodlot to talk about the habitat concerns that you may have. New York Forest Owners Association, it also has a great website, and it has a lot of people and a lot of information on wildlife. Someone had mentioned NRCS, Forest Service, etc. Those are all government programs and agencies that have great programs. DEC Public Service Foresters are a huge resource that people should take advantage of. You can call up your local regional office and have a forester stop by and give you a half-day walkthrough. Private consultant foresters and industrial foresters can do more for you. They're all professionals. Most of them know quite a bit about wildlife habitat and how complementary that is. And then there's specialty organizations such as Audubon, the Rough Grouse Society, and the National Wild Turkey Federation. All are very keen on habitat management. And then our references and resources, I put together quite a list this morning. And when you cancel out of this webinar in just a few minutes, you will go to that site. You'll go to that Forest Connect name site, and that's loaded with information, plus my one page of references and resources that cover a lot of the material I just talked about. So that's it. I think I'm down to the end. Thank you, and questions.
Great job, Gary. I had a lot of fun with that, so I hope everybody else, I'm sure everybody did. So this is a chance, if you all have questions, to please feel free to throw out those questions. Gary can respond, I can respond. There are several others on the participants who are able to respond. Gary pointed out the Cornell Forest Connect.ning site. That's a social networking site, and it's a place that you can go and ask questions. There are over 300, I think, members. It's free to subscribe to that Ning site, social media site. It's a place to ask and answer questions. You can post pictures. There's a blog there. We use it for periodic updates, and we use it as a chance to kind of as a repository to store information, such as the list of wildlife habitat resources that otherwise might be hard to put in a place that people can find. So there's a question Paul was asking about what's the best time of year to mow for woodcock habitat? Gary?
Well, there's more than woodcock out there. That's the funny thing is all these habitats have different kinds of wildlife using it through the year. And a rule of thumb is don't mow your grasslands until August 1st, because we've got a whole host of grassland birds nesting there. And if you mow it in June, you're going to be wrecking the nest, obviously. On the other hand, if you have to have the grass to feed your cattle, then I guess that's just the way it goes. And that's an active farm, and good green grass in June is worth a lot more than old dry dead grass in August. But the rule of thumb is mow it in August and mow it every third year. That's what I would do. And also, the Ruffed Grouse Society, another favorite bird of the Ruffed Grouse Society is the woodcock, and they have some great information on their website about management for ruffed grouse and woodcock. I saw one there, what was the shrub that was good for ruffed grouse? Basically anything, any nut, berry, or fruit is good for ruffed grouse. All the dogwoods, all the native dogwoods produce berries. The one that is very common is that red panicled dogwood. That's fairly common, but there's a whole slew of silky dogwood, red osier dogwood. Virtually all the dogwoods have flowers good for pollinators and fruit good for wildlife.
So a couple people have asked Gary about the archives and the representation of this webinar. So all of we're shifting all of the webinar recordings from the Cornell server onto YouTube. YouTube has a more stable, it's hard to believe I'm saying this, has a more stable server interface than we can access here. And most importantly, from my perspective, it provides really good documentation about the number of people that watch and the duration of time that people watch. So it's nice for kind of record keeping. So this webinar is being recorded. It's going to take a few days before I'm able to upload it to YouTube. This webinar will be live again tonight at 7 p.m. So if you know somebody that wants to see it, you can send them the connection information, or actually have them register so that we can get an accurate head count, if you will, of people who are registered and attending. We had 85 at the peak, and we have there are about 130 people who have gotten the registration access code, so I'd expect another 50 people tonight or so.
Good.
So Barbara has a question: impacts of the new EPA regs on water. On the land and owners. I don't know about the new EPA regs on water. Was somebody?
Yeah, I don't know anything about that either.
Anybody from EPA or maybe from one of the federal agencies that can, or Barbara maybe can expand on? We need to know more about what those regulations are before we could discuss their impacts. So,
the missing chipmunk population. A lot of people don't like chipmunks in their dooryard because they eventually, tunnel out their their walls and show up in the house and barn, place like that. But a chipmunk is kind of a woodland generalist, and I don't know what it would take to have chipmunks necessarily. But like I say, the place to go is read up on the life and history of natural history of woodchucks, and with an keen eye toward habitat, and what food, what resources, what water, what shelter will it need through 12 months of the year. And if you can figure all those out and kind of build a list, then you compare it about, so what do I have in my 1 or 2 acres around my house, if that's where you want them, and you pick a limiting factor, or 2 or 3 of them. You may have 2 or 3 limiting factors, and it won't take much to provide desirable habitat for woodchuck or for chipmunks, I'm guessing.
So there's a question I've received here on continuing forestry education credits. This has been submitted for approval, and I don't know exactly. It's submitted to SAF for approval. If you would like continuing education credits, and I don't know if it will be SAF Category 1 or Category 2, make sure you click on that link that I just posted. Please do it today. It's easier for me when it's time-stamped today. And I will provide you documentation that you participated, and then you all can take that to whatever credentialing organization you want. I provided that list also to SAF. If you're an SAF member, they automatically connect your name with these credits. So, but I don't know off the top of my head what the exact CFE category would be. It'll be for 1 credit hour, either Category 1 or Category 2.
The Wildlife Society also provides continuing education credits, and I would guess that this webinar, as many webinars, would qualify you for some of those continuing ed credits.
I didn't know that. I'll have to get. I should get information because I get pre-approval through SAF. It'd be easy enough to do the same thing for
absolutely. It should be almost identical. Yeah. And a lot of people are very interested in getting those credits because they want to maintain their certified wildlife biologist credentials.
Yep. Okay, well, it looks like we've covered the questions. Gary, I want to thank you again. This was an outstanding presentation. I particularly like the chronology of the slides showing the aspen clear cut that had that pine tree in the middle and just how quickly it regenerated. Everybody's seen that kind of in general, but to have it captured in pictures is a very powerful testimony. So, all right, well, thank you all for participating. I hope you all have a Merry Christmas. We'll be back again on We'll be back tonight at 7 p.m., but the next month's webinar is the 3rd Wednesday of January, the 15th, and we'll be learning from Mark Whitmore about hemlock woolly adelgid. So put that on your calendar, January 15th. Thank you all. Thank you, Gary. We'll be live again tonight at 7 p.m. and wishing you all Merry Christmas.
Yes, indeed. Thank you for attending, everybody. Bye.